Hello, welcome to the CURE presentation, Fermentation. I'm Leslie Kaiser, Garden Coordinator and a moderator for this session. Our presenter this afternoon is Linda Curley. Linda is a Health and Human Sciences Educator for Purdue University Extension. She holds a master's degree from Purdue University. Linda serves on the statewide Purdue Extension Mastering Home Food Preservation team. She is a certified ServSafe instructor, proctor, teaching food safety principles to food service workers or anyone providing prepared foods to the general public. In her educator position, the Health and Human Sciences program area provides community education focused on food, family, finance, and wellness. Linda, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Amanda and Leslie. Today we're going to be talking about fermentation, especially that science and safety behind it. So we'll look at a couple of fermented products and how they are prepared, but I also will take some time to go through the science behind it, as well as how important it is for us to follow safety precautions as we ferment foods. On the call today, we might have lots of folks that are very skilled in this area, or we might have lots of folks who are very new to it. So I want to make sure that we're speaking to everybody and you have enough information to move you forward if this is something you're interested in doing. So today we'll talk about lactofermentation, and it is a metabolic process that converts the sugars, acids, and gases to acids and gases and or alcohol. So lactic acid bacteria, we often call it LAB, and you can see it there listed in caps. It breaks down a food in this process and it lowers the pH. When we lower pH, we actually make more acid or have more acid in the food product. So examples of this are cucumbers that we turn into pickles through fermentation, as well as milk can be turned into yogurt. So lactobacillus strains are the main microorganisms in fermentation, with a few other microorganisms assisting. Lactobacillus when given a favorable environment, will convert those carbohydrates, sugars, and starches into lactic acid. And the lactic acid environment then prevents other microorganisms, or we might even say the undesirable microorganisms, from colonizing in the food, and it prevents further decomposition. There are many reasons why fermentation is practiced in the home, including preservation, flavor enhancement, tradition, and suggested health benefits. So in short, foods are preserved by adding bacteria that converts sugars into acids. The higher acidity of these foods preserves them by preventing the growth of harmful bacteria. So historically, this has been a way for people to preserve the harvest through the winter. Years ago in Germany, and still, sauerkraut was an important way to stay healthy during the winter, thanks to the nutritional value within the ferment, which includes healthy amounts of vitamin C. Sailors were often known to eat sauerkraut as a way to keep enough vitamin C in their system as they traveled the seas. So a large part of human history relied on fermentation as a way to preserve vegetables and help keep people healthy. Today, fermentation continues to be widespread and even more practiced throughout lots of parts of the world. I think COVID also helped people to experiment in their kitchens while they were in their homes with lots of preservation opportunities. And this was a favorite. So that's why this presentation is being brought to you today. So many regions and nations around the world have their own favorite fermented foods. You may have heard of something like kimchi from Korea, or as I just mentioned, sauerkraut from Germany. So here's a list of some of those common ferments that we've heard about. Oftentimes people forget that bread making and sourdough bread is a ferment. Cheese and yogurts and alcoholic beverages are certainly ferments. So sauerkraut is listed here on the top of our list. We're going to focus a little bit on that one today, as well as fermented pickles and kombucha, because those are popular ones. And we only have a short period of time. That sauerkraut is a natural ferment that's caused by cabbage and salt working together. We call this a dry brine. So as we move through the slides today, you'll notice that I don't show you a recipe where water is added to the brine. It is the sauerkraut and the salt working together. The sour taste that you taste when you eat sauerkraut is created when the lab converts the carbohydrates within the cabbage to lactic acid. So that's where that sour taste comes from. So again, I'm going to focus on just a few of these today: the sauerkraut, fermented pickles, and the kombucha. Once again, I urge you to follow trusted recipes and procedures when practicing any home food preservation methods. Here's a list of reliable resources for fermentation, and you'll also be receiving a little bit more complete list from Amanda. She has a handout that she'll send to those that are on the call today. So this is a caution for you. According to Davis and Kendall of Colorado State University Extension, the bacterium E. coli is of particular concern in our produce because of its hardiness and the severe consequences of infection. So just be careful to make sure that you irrigate your garden with potable water if you're pulling produce out of your own garden. What I mean by potable water is drinkable water. And never apply uncomposted manure to growing food crops. And then remember to wash your hands thoroughly before working with food, and then thoroughly wash fruits and vegetables before you eat them or prepare them for fermentation. Afterwards, after you're finished, there's a whole host of things you need to do as well. So according to the World Health Organization, basic food safety guidelines must be followed when fermenting foods. And the report states that there is considerable evidence that lactic acid fermentation inhibits the survival and multiplication of a number of bacterial pathogens that we're not interested in keeping in the product because they're harmful. However, the report adds that the potential of lactic acid fermentation to control that harmful effect of contaminants depends on how you follow the directions to make sure that you're following quantities, initial contamination levels. So are you eating fruits and vegetables or preparing the fruits and vegetables for the ferment that are in fact clean, that you've washed them? So all of the conditions that I'm going to talk about today, including hygiene and sanitation, the temperature and so forth as well, they are all very important to your success. So on its own, fermentation cannot eliminate all food-related health risks, and it should not be seen as replacement for observing general principles of hygiene. So tested recipes here that I'm going to be talking to you about today, as well as all that you would be processing or procedures that you would be using for home fermentation. They're all based on an average room temperature of about 73 degrees. So if you're in an environment that you don't have your air conditioning on, and I don't know what the temperature is today, but we're supposed to get some really hot temperatures over the weekend. Fermentation in those very, very hot temperatures above 80 or 85 degrees, it's not predictable. You don't know if the bad microorganisms or spoilage microorganisms are going to work faster than the production of lactic acid that are, you know, the good microorganisms that we'd like to have within our product. So again, make sure that you're fermenting in an environment that can help for this process to happen safely. And then finally, at temperatures below 65, Fermentation will take a longer time to complete. So lots of people have a tendency to put their ferments in the fridge. And I'm often asked, does it continue to ferment? Well, it continues to ferment in the fridge, but at such a very slow rate. But when you take it out of the fridge again, it continues to ferment as it would in a regular 73 or average 73 degree room. Okay, so a little bit about pH for you. The pH of food is the measurement of how much acid or base is in a particular food. The more acidic a food is, the lower its pH. Sometimes people get that confused. So during fermentation, the pH of a food is lowered with that conversion of lactic acid bacteria or lab. It's converting sugar to acid. This acidity is what provides a preservation effect on the food. So to produce a safe fermented product, it's important that the pH drop from around a pH of 7 to a pH of 5.2 or lower in the first 24 hours. And then to below the pH again to below 4.6 within 48 hours. For this to occur, it's critical that a food's environmental conditions not be manipulated and that we keep them the same so that we have optimum growth of the lactic acid bacteria or lab. These conditions include making sure acidity levels, temperature, oxygen, moisture, and salt are favorable to the growth of lab. So again, follow reputable guidelines, clean surfaces, produce, and your hands before you begin. I would suggest that you make a solution of vinegar to water, about a 1-to-1 ratio. And again, that's potable water that you can drink. Put it in a spray bottle and disinfect your sinks, your surfaces before beginning your fermentation preparations. Okay, right now there have been no reports of pathogenic microorganisms associated with standard pickle products prepared under good manufacturing processes or good gardening processes if you're following recipes. But I have to say, I was on a national call with Dr. Elizabeth Andrus from University of Georgia. Actually, she retired recently, and people have so many questions for her about fermentation and so forth that a question was posed about the opportunity for Listeria to grow in fermented foods. And so she did say that this can propose a concern, insufficient acid production, and that anaerobic environment for fermentation's conditions. It can establish conditions in which Clostridium botulinum may grow and produce harmful neurotoxins. So it's critical to follow correct salt level, proper temperature, and the production of sufficient acid production. And we will look as we go through the slides at what you should be looking for and what is really problematic in a product. So this particular image is actually obtained from the Journal of Functional Foods, and it didn't have a copyright issue, so I thought we would pop it into the slide here. So according to the Journal of Functional Foods, in a 2020 publication, some of the health benefits in consuming fermented products include things like lowering serum cholesterol, preventing cellular damage, improving digestion and gut health. Lots of valuable nutrients and antioxidants are here. There's been some research to help us with understanding the slower absorption of sugars in those that have diabetes. So these are all things that the Journal of Functional Foods has reported. There are many other reports, And then there are some reports that say that there was no benefit found, especially in kombucha. So we'll look at that momentarily. All right, so let's look a little bit at some of the supplies that you might need for just doing maybe a basic sauerkraut, okay? You'll notice here that there's the produce, and I have green as well as purple cabbage. I've got a canning jar here because I like to ferment in small batch, and I would really suggest to you to ferment in small batch originally. If you are not somebody that it's done this before, you might want to do it in a small batch so that you can see if this is really for you before you waste a lot of produce and a lot of time and energy on something that you're not going to like, right? So you'll want to try this in a small batch. In this picture, I have just a wide mouth canning jar. You can also use a food safe crock, and anything that you ferment has to be fermented in a food safe container and stored in a food safe container. So I've heard crazy stories of people making gobs of sauerkraut in garbage cans and garbage bags and so forth. Everything that you use in fermentation has to be in a food safe container. You'll also see in the center of the picture here, and I'll move my mouse over it, I've got a couple of glass weights. And I also, in this jar, have a spring-loaded weight. And I have some, if the video works for us, great, but I also have some still shots that we can take a look at to see what I'm talking about there. In the center here, I have what is a wooden masher. You certainly don't need that if you want to use your fingers or your hands to mash and squish up the kraut or the cabbage. Just make sure your hands are super clean, fingernails are super clean, and even people will often wear gloved hands if they feel like they want to be super safe. Okay, so this is actually just a kraut masher, and you'll notice that it's wooden. And what we try to do when we ferment is use materials that won't interact with the ferment. So wood is a good idea, plastic is a good idea, very good quality stainless steel is a good idea, but using metals is a bit problematic. You'll also see that here is an air remover. It's not a must, but it's a good idea. These are actually airlock lids. There's one here from Ball on top of this jar, and then there's a couple other here. This one actually has a date gauge on it so that you can kind of turn it to tell you either when you prepared it or when you need to pull it out of the ferment and get it into the fridge, or can it if you prefer. Something I don't have here is a pH tester or a thermometer for the side of your jar, but you can also purchase those in, stores that maybe you can get beer making supplies, wine making supplies, and you can certainly get these online as well. Okay, last week I mentioned to you that it was really important for you to use pickling canning salt in your home food preservation. I will say it again. There is pickling and canning salt in nearly every grocery store that I've ever been to, especially the big box stores. It does not contain an anti-caking ingredient, which is mostly in our table salts and so forth. And it also is formulated so that you get a clear brine. Now, granted, you do often get a cloudy brine as you move through fermentation, but you want to start out with a clear brine so that you know you're doing this properly. So in food preservation, we always suggest and highly recommend that you use canning salt. You'll notice here that I've got spring water. Okay, so in my house, I have well water. I happen to live kind of in the boondocks. So it's important for you to make sure that you're using water that will help to facilitate lab, right? So a spring water is your best bet. Don't use chlorinated tap water because of the fact that it can, again, affect the lab. And chlorine is something that we actually knock down microorganisms with. And also don't use purified water. When you chop, again, I told you about those things that can react with the product. And so this happens to be a chopper that I use, but it has really high quality stainless steel blades in it. And the general composition of this instrument is plastics. So again, you can use a grater, you can use a food processor, you can use a knife. It's just that we want to kind of limit exposure to things that can react with the product. So here's a typical recipe. This one happens to be from the National Center of Home Food Preservation. You'll notice that about 4 pounds of pickling cucumbers are being used here. If in fact this is too big a recipe for you, I'm going to give you a little bit of the quantities that you should be thinking about when you think of brine, okay? In this case, you can put dill seed, fresh dill or dill weed in it. You see there for the 4 pounds of cucumbers and the dill seed or dill weed or fresh heads of dill, you see that you're using a 1/2 cup of salt. This would be canning salt. In this particular recipe, they've added a 1/4 cup of vinegar and then they've added water to it. This is for dill pickles, okay? We have 2 cloves of garlic and red peppers and other pickling spices if indeed you desire. So here's the process that we would use for dill pickles, all right? Do you notice that I'm holding up on the left side of the screen, I'm holding up a small pickling cucumber, and on that end, I'm trying to show you the blossom end or what the blossom end of the pickle would look like. Usually on the other end, you'll see a little bit of the stem, right? The blossom is where that flower had come out originally before the produce came to be part of the plant. You will cut about a 1/16 of a slice off of that blossom end. You can discard it or compost it, whatever you'd like to do. The reason that you do this is because the enzymes, or a good quantity of enzymes, is held in that specific area. And if we can discard those enzymes now, there'll be less breaking down of the pickle and it'll be much more crunchy in the process. Okay, so you would, put your dill pickles and your spices in the bottom of a clean, suitable food grade container. You can then add your cucumbers, the remaining dill and spices, and then you want to make sure that you have a big enough, here I have a glass Pyrex, a big enough container to add those wet ingredients. And again, with the pickles, we're going to use a wet brine. For the cabbage, as I'll show you in a few minutes, we're going to be using a dry brine. But in this case, I have mixed the water, the salt, and the vinegar in this vessel, and then I mix it up and dissolve it well so that I can pour it evenly. If I had several jars, in this case, I've only got the 1 jar, but I can pour it evenly then over the product. And every jar would get the same amount of liquid and salt as it's dissolved. Okay, so then you need to add a suitable cover and weight. And in this picture here, and in fact, this is a video, we're going to see if it will work for us. This is the glass weight. I could put that on top of the jar here. And the reason why I want that weight is I want to create an anaerobic environment. That means that I want all the product that I've just put into the jar to sit, the solids anyway, to sit below the liquids, okay? Because that's how we create an anaerobic environment. So this is a glass weight. The jar that you see next to you, this is a product from Crowdsource, and this too is an airlock, but it does have a spring weight built into it. I'm going to see if this video will play for us. If not, it's no big deal because it's just me showing you how to put the stuff on. So again, there's the glass weight goes in and I push it down so I can clear the top. Here's that airlock lid that I'm putting on top. It takes a little doing because that weight wants to pass, push itself back up. So there you go. That's how you would put the weight in the jar and then have an airlock lid on top. Okay, so I mentioned a few minutes ago about this idea of storing in a temperature that was about an average of 73. So really that temperature between 70 and 75 is great. You would store it in a, off in a kind of a dark environment. Actually, when I ferment, I do leave them on my countertops on a tray, but I put a towel over them and check them every day. You'll ferment this for about 3 to 4 weeks. What you see on the right side of the screen is actually a strip that you can take the backing off of and you can adhere it to your jar, and it's actually a thermometer. So it kind of tells you what temperature your product is sitting at. Avoid temperatures above 80 degrees, and I mentioned earlier that 80 to 85 degrees, or the pickles will become soft during the process. And again, we can't guarantee that the good bacteria is overcoming the bad bacteria because of the fact that the bad bacteria loves these warm, moist environments. So check the container several times during the week. I often look at it nearly every day to make sure I see bubbles forming. If you move the jar a slight bit, you'll often see bubbles come up from the top and leave the jar because they've gone through the airlock. So make sure you're looking at the container, and you'll remove any kind of scum or mold that's on the top of the fermented product. Again, if they become too slimy, soft, develop a disagreeable odor, if they become leggy, and what I mean by that is like you'll see strands of bacteria that kind of are forming across the bottoms of the pickles and then extending down, it really is important for you to discard them. Something has gone wrong. So notice that I've got 2 types of airlocks on these two. That's the ball, a little bit more close up of what I showed you a few minutes ago. This happens to be a ferment that I made with the green and purple cabbage that you saw a few minutes ago. So you can see that's why that brine is so purple. What you see also are these bubbles forming, which is really important for you to see that happening. That way you know that carbon dioxide is being released and it will go out the airlock. This is the crowdsource version that I talked about a few minutes ago. This is made of very good grade stainless steel. You actually pour a little water in this moat here in order for you to have an anaerobic environment. There is a spring here that is pushing down all of these pickles and other ingredients in order for the brine to be above the solids within the jar. That's just a second caution. Make sure that if anything seems really off to you, that you discard them. Okay, so for fully fermented pickles, it may take as much as 4 to 6 months. And then, after you consume them or after you put them in the refrigerator, 4 to 6 months for you to eat them up, okay? Again, you might still have some scum or surface mold on the top, and you'll have to remove that and discard that. So the length of period of time prior to putting those pickles in the refrigerator can certainly vary depending on how much of a ferment you like, how strong do you like those flavors to be. So follow that recipe and find the one that works best for you. So if you are making fully fermented pickles, many of you might disagree with me on the call here, but I'm talking food safety. Canning fully fermented pickles is truly the safest way to store them. And when we do can them, we really don't can traditionally. We actually can them with low temperature pasteurization. And I'm going to show you a slide after this one that will help you understand that method. If you want to can them, you just pour the brine into a pan, you heat it slowly, and you boil it and bring it to simmer for 5 minutes. And then you can filter the brine through like a coffee filter or some cheesecloth. Cheesecloth has a tendency sometimes, though, to get fibers and debris. You can reduce the cloudiness that way if you want your jarred pickles to really look just aesthetically more pleasing. You'll fill the jars with the pickles and the hot brine, making sure you have a 1/2 inch headspace. Last week, we talked about measuring that headspace. It's highly correlated to expelling the oxygen within that jar to make it a safe anaerobic environment. And then this low pasteurization method, I'm going to show you a picture here. And again, this is found in the Complete Guide to Home Canning. It's a great illustration of how you heat the water between 180 and 85 degrees. So you'll need a thermometer here, and you'll actually process them at that temperature for 30 minutes. And that's called the low pasteurization method. Many of our manufacturers use low pasteurization methods to make sure that things are safe. And so you might be saying to yourself, well, Linda, I just did all this work to get the benefits of fermentation. Isn't this going to kill them? Yes, it will. But if you like the taste of the fermented pickle, which many people like that deli taste that they have, and you want to keep them on the shelf safely for a lengthy time, in dry storage or in cabinetry or shelving, this is the best and safest way for you to do that. All right, so let's look at the second fermentation opportunity that we'll talk about today, and that's sauerkraut. And as I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, this is called a dry brine. You don't see any water here in the recipe. It's just cabbage and pickling salt. And so they work together to give us that brine, okay? You want to work with firm heads of cabbage, and you'll shred the cabbage to start that kraut to make that brine for you. But they're hoping that you bring cabbage in from your own garden and harvest it and process it quite quickly. It's a great benefit if you're growing this produce yourself, so you know what's happening with it from start to finish. You know how you're treating it. You know what you're putting on it. Hopefully you're making sure that if there are dogs or deer or anything that's visiting your garden, that you are aware of those kinds of things, because of the fact that when we talked about things like E. coli, salmonella, and Listeria earlier, they all can happen in the garden, and there's something that you should be well aware of. Okay, so in this case, for this larger recipe, you can work with about 5 pounds of cabbage at a time. You're going to shred it, core it and shred it actually. That core is quite thick, and unless you're going to process it in the food processor and get it very, very, very small, you get it to the point where it's so small it actually makes the water or the brine very, very cloudy. And so again, we usually tell people to just core it and compost the core, and then cut things and slice them into thin strips. So as I mentioned before, you can use a food processor, you can use a mandolin, you can use a cabbage mandolin. It's kind of wooden and it's got a box on it for safety, or you can use a knife, just a regular kitchen knife. And then you're going to slowly add that salt and work it in so that it draws out the juices of the cabbage. You'll put some more in, salt it. Again, you're going to keep working it so that you get enough brine to cover the cabbage in the jar. This again is mine. I'll show you how mine works. It's in a video here. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. I just push down this top and I push it through, and it really is pretty safe because I keep my fingers behind it. Okay, so depending on the recipe, you again will be adding that canning salt and evenly distributing it. I mentioned to you earlier that if this amount of cabbage seems too big for you to start it on the front end, making a small batch is a possibility for you too. So the salt ratio is still important here. You're looking for about 2% salt ratio, which means 2 grams of salt for every 100 grams of cabbage. So in order to calculate this, I've kind of put it here on the screen for you. I do have a weight in my kitchen. So you would weigh your cabbage and weigh it in grams, and then multiply that by 0.02. And that will equal the grams of salt that are needed for you to make your ferment or your dry brine with your cabbage. Okay, you'll see here again, I've got a wide mouth jar, a funnel, a kraut masher, and a spring-loaded weight for me to start doing this. So again, little video here, you can see how I fill the jars. So I'm putting that funnel in so I get as much of it inside the jar as not. And I'll just fill up through the funnel. And again, don't fill the whole jar at once. Just putting a few scoops in there with a wooden spoon, non-reactive wooden spoon and bowl, kind of trying to make it as less messy as possible. And there's that masher. And as I mash down on it, you'll start to notice that some of that brine is coming out. More and more of it will come out as we move forward. So we'll look at some other slides here. Okay, so now you can see that I've got the jar completely full, and I'm going to show you the video here. I could use this weight as I used a few minutes ago to show you how to close the jar, but this time I'm going to use the spring weight. You can imagine that you've got some resistance as you're moving it and putting it on the jar and trying to cap it. So you'll notice that I have a little difficulty, but you need to work the bottom of the jar to catch the treads as you move forward. Oops, I'm going to go backwards. I'm sorry. I told you I was going to do it, and when I clicked the slide, I advanced. So again, there's that masher. Do you see how much more brine is in there now than there were a few minutes ago? That's the same jar. I'm going to move that off to the side. If you're using purple cabbage, use a paper towel because I'll tell you it stains everything. I could use that one, but I wanted to show you how to use the spring-loaded. So here you go. You push it down. It's got a screen on the bottom of it that keeps everything down. And then the trick here is to get that lid on top of it without it really popping out of your hands. And I usually turn the bottom of the jar and kind of hold the top so that I can get that tread to match and fill. And there it is, ready to go. Okay, and the last thing I have to say, it's very important for you to store it on a tray. Now, again, this isn't a food safety issue, but I usually store it on a tray in my kitchen with a towel over it, just because if there is some overflow, and in this case, it would be purple overflow, you don't want to stain surfaces. So I can certainly put that tray in a dishwasher. So it's advised that you stick it on a tray in a temperature area that's going to be okay for the ferment. About 70 to 75 degrees is the window of temperature we're looking for. And then cover it up. And I just use a clean dish towel and I cover it up. Now we're going to talk a little bit about kombucha. And you're probably looking at this Scoby and saying, that is pretty gross for those of you that haven't made kombucha before. It's a bit of you got to get over it a little bit. So kombucha is fermented tea. It's really made with tea, sugar, and this culture. And this culture is called a Scoby. And that means, or it stands for, symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. So if you're interested in kombucha, you can actually order these online, actually, or you can order them in a dehydrated form where you would have to rehydrate it. But you can order it certainly, and it comes in an ROP, which is a reduced oxygen packaging unit, and you could then use it as well. So the Scoby is a biofilm layer made of beneficial bacteria and yeast that you will in fact put in the kombucha jar. Here's a good example of what it looks like. And again, if you're not used to seeing these images, you're probably saying, oh boy. So this is the Scoby, and you can see it's really taking over that larger jar. And down in the bottom here is the kombucha, or the tea at this point, if it hasn't actually sat for a long enough period of time. So I have to say that there's not enough scientific evidence that exists to support the health claims surrounding the tea's ability to fight disease, stop aging, detoxify the body. However, kombucha is a fermented food and a good source of probiotics. And probiotics are defined as live microorganisms that are important for gut health. Kombucha also contains vitamin B, antioxidant, organic acids, and trace minerals. So unflavored kombucha has about 30 calories and 2 to 3 grams of sugar per 8 ounces. And you might say, how can that be, considering the recipes for kombucha are quite sugar laden? It is because of the fact that the sugar is being eaten by the Scoby. And so when in fact the process is finished, there is far less sugar than you started out with in your product. Okay, here again, sanitation is super important. The University of Wisconsin suggests following food safety precautions when making homemade kombucha. Sanitation is the most important food safety rule. Use sterile containers and utensils. Practice proper hand washing. And in this item, sugar is the key ingredient. The table sugar and table sugar should be used here. Sugar used to sweeten the brewed tea feeds the bacteria and yeast needed to produce the kombucha. So you'll be adding sugar at a rate of 1.76 ounces per quart of tea. It is also recommended that you do not use herbal teas. Just black or green tea should be used for this beverage base. You'll heat the tea to boiling and cool it rapidly, and then add the starter. You'll ferment the kombucha at about 68 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 to 10 days. Cooler temperatures might take a longer period of time for it to ferment. Do not ferment in the sun or where the temperature can rise too high. You'll then refrigerate the kombucha after you ferment it. Leaving it capped at room temperature for periods longer than suggested could result in more carbon dioxide accumulation than you expected, and it could explode because of the fact that there's just so much in the solution. So here you'll see that somebody put a paper towel with a rubber band over the top of it when they're making the kombucha, and then we often put on top of it a regular top, but you can burp the top every couple of days in order for you not to have so much carbon dioxide pressure in there. Lots of people do like that. They'll put fruits and spices inside of it, and they like that effervescence. But again, just remember, it's going to just fly out of that container, so you better be careful with that. When you've made your kombucha, you reserve 2 cups of it and the Scoby to act as your starter culture for your next fermentation. Remember that Scoby is going to continue to get larger and larger because you're feeding it. And oftentimes people say, just like we used to do with bread starters or sourdough starters, this is something that you can share with a friend. You can take it and pull it apart. Make sure you're doing it, you're not cutting it in half. You're actually pulling the layers apart, and you can share it with a friend. You'll bottle the remaining kombucha and add any desired flavorings, fruits, spices, and leave about 1 to 2 inches of headspace. And you can let that ferment for about 1 or 2 more days. And again, that carbon dioxide within that vessel is going to be pretty powerful, so be careful. So what about troubleshooting? What about this idea of something going wrong? Like, what am I looking for? So molds and or yeast growing on the surface of the fermented food should be skimmed off and not be allowed to grow, as they will change the acidity. Growth occurs best in air, so make sure to create and maintain that anaerobic environment or conditions for it. If growth is noticed, test the pH, and again, there are pH strips. And if it's off, or if there's something going on that really isn't right, discard it. Foaming during fermentation is due to the carbon dioxide formation. Foaming is expected and normal, but it may not happen or even be noticeable. And if it's not happening, like even those little bubbles that I showed you in my ferments a few minutes ago that were rather new ferments, you should be really watching it for bubble formation or the release of carbon dioxide. If foaming occurs again, you'll skim it off. Mushy ferments are often the indication of improper fermentation due to weak brine or too high a temperature during the fermentation, an uneven salt distribution, or even air pockets. Mushiness is caused by spoilage microorganisms, but pathogenic microorganisms can also be present. It's best to discard it if you've got any of these things going on. Bitterness may be due to spices, vinegar, dry weather, or even using salt substitutes. And you shouldn't be using salt substitutes. You should be using the canning salt. Fermentation gives off odors. That's normal. But if the smell is foul, this could indicate problems such as pathogenic or spoilage microorganism growth. So it's a best practice here to check the pH. If it's off, discard. Keep fermenting foods protected from insects, as they will lay eggs on the surface, and this could lead to physical contamination and off flavors. So again, keep that covered loosely in some way, shape, or form. You can use, the lids that I showed you. Lots of people will use cheesecloth, but just remember that muslin or cheesecloth needs to be able to let that air come through, and make sure that it isn't so laden with fibers that it's actually going to go into your product. Color changes certainly are expected. Green cabbage will turn yellow or pinkish. In my case, you could see that that purple was kind of taking over in the jar. If pickles are too dark, it may be due to the hard water that you used or a high mineral content in the water. So again, make sure that you're using like a spring water. If you used ground spices or something like that, you could in fact discolor the look of the brine. So try to use whole spices in your fermentation container. It's important to use non-reactive materials, as I said to you earlier. So the use of brass, iron, copper, and zinc containers are certainly going to react, and you should not use them. Slimy ferments are usually caused by ferments that are done at too high a temperature. Again, as those spoilage microorganisms might have taken over. If you've got some sediment on the bottom, it might be due to not using canning salt and it didn't dissolve well enough, or uneven distribution. Hollow pickles can be due to improper fermentation caused by using produce that maybe was too mature or too large. And then often you can get some shriveling too. Perhaps that they too were too mature, or they've been fermented for too long, or you're using too strong a brine in the process. So let's follow these safety tips as we're thinking about fermenting and all the good benefits it can provide us, but we do want to keep things safe. So always use newly harvested, unblemished produce and wash that produce well. Wash, rinse, and sanitize all your surfaces. And in the case of a few minutes ago, I said that you could use that solution of vinegar water. That's a nice, cheap, inexpensive way to keep things clean. Wash your hands well, fingernails, in between your fingers, rings, all those things that you might have on your hand, you can take those off if you are really somebody that likes to get into that cabbage and get the brine working. And finally, I can't stress enough how important it is for you to use reputable, tested recipes. Here are some of the resources that we talked about today. And as I mentioned to you earlier, Amanda has this list, and there are certainly great resources for you to follow. If you'll notice here on the bottom, Sandor Katz is listed, as well as the NOMA lab, the fermentation lab is a Norwegian lab that they have really tried to think about food, sustainability, thinking out of the box with foods that are edible, that can be fermented, can taste delicious, can be healthy for us, and that can feed the world. So the NOMA guide is really one of the best resources as well, if you want to hear about the research or what they're doing in order to make food safe. Sandor Katz has always been somebody that folks turn to in his two books, The Art of Fermentation as well as Wild Fermentation, are great opportunities for you to learn and read more about it. And then I have given you lots of resources from our extension universities across the nation who have lots of different pieces of information that you can pull together in reference to recipes, food safety, how to, everything you need when you're trying to practice and learn fermentation. So at this point, I just want to ask if we have any questions that perhaps came up in the chat box as we were moving through the presentation. I'd love to hear from those of you that are fermenters or those of you that would like to be. If you've got any questions now, certainly the time to ask them.
Hi, Linda. We do have a question. One participant would like to know your thoughts on whether a podcaster she listens to can be considered a trusted source on this topic.
So at Purdue Extension, as well as all other extension universities around the nation, we do so much testing in this area, and Purdue actually does a really great job of testing product for us. So let's say that somebody is interested in selling a home canned or whatever the case may be product. They do some testing on campus that tells us pH and water activity levels. They're very good about reviewing recipes and making sure that things are safe. And so we always know that our universities are working in tandem with the USDA to make sure that they are looking at the research. What often happens is folks who have perhaps a website or whatever the case may be, they have a tendency to get quite creative because they want to sound like they've got a newer idea than others do. So they might add or subtract or just follow a different path with a recipe. And so the reason why we are focused on those trusted, tested recipes is because of the fact that we know that these are the best you can do in order to stay safe. So I can't really comment on a blogger or somebody who is working in this area because I'm not sure if they know the research or have done the research behind the work that they're providing or the information they're providing to you. So that's where I'm at with that one. So I hope that helped answer your question. This is something you're interested in doing, or even if you want to know about fermented products that are in the grocery store, like how are they doing this? What's so great about this? Hopefully this presentation helped you with that as well. We certainly enjoy your feedback, and we like to make sure that we're providing information that's useful to you. And so we welcome your feedback and your comments. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Leslie. I appreciate your time, and it was great working with you.
Yes, thank you so much, Linda, for sharing your knowledge and expertise on this topic.
My pleasure.